Greetings and welcome back to St. Dominic's Weekly, the quarantine editions, Screwtape Letters additions to that. Father Isaiah here, Father Michael over there.
I'm calling this at this point a limited series. You ever notice that when they put out like different, sometimes it's kind of like...
Do podcasts come in mint?
Yeah, exactly. No. You know, sometimes you see like a television show or a movie and sometimes it's just like, it's like, oh, here's a show. But other times, oh, this is prestige. This is a limited series. I'm calling Quarantine Chronicles Screwtape Letters a limited series. Do you like
series.
that?
So which means we won't release them again for another 20 years.
That's right, exactly.
Okay,
It's a limited series. There'll be a DVD gold box collection.
Gold box collection. That'd be a good fundraiser.
Exactly, the Criterion collection. So here we are again to delve in, and I think we had said we wanted to do it several parts. As we're going through this, I'm not sure how many, but we're just going to go through until we get to the end. So we might be talking limited series. This might be less limited than we thought. We at first we thought
we're going to have a couple seasons of this.
No, it won't be more than 2 seasons.
Won't be no longer than 2 seasons.
No, usually they have to cancel seasons early. No, but the idea is to remember way back when we wanted to do a podcast on just Screwtape Letters, just one podcast, and then we got a couple of letters in, and I thought, wow, there's too much here.
There's too much here.
Yeah. So now I'm thinking as I actually broke down the different chapters. I'm thinking 7 parts, limited series, seven snapshots, and 7's a great number.
It's a holy number, you know.
It is. So right now we're on. So if day 1 is Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part was Monday and Tuesday. So now this is Tuesday.
Okay, so that's what's created that day?
Exactly. The 4th day. Actually, the 4th day is where you get, because the easy way to remember the order of creation is that he takes on basically Saturday's off to watch college football, so he rests on that day. But otherwise, he's doing stuff. And the first 3 days are all about organization. So it's separating out, right? So the separation.
Light from darkness and the waters from the land and all that. Yeah.
That's right. So it creates the kind of the space. So I think of it, if you think of the, it's like creating space in your home. It's just like he's building it out. He's building the foundation. The structure's going up. And then he decorates, he fills the room. So he creates the rooms and then he fills them. So first 3 days are separation. So day 4 is going to be the actual appointment or decoration of light and darkness, and so this is where you get
separation and decoration?
Sun and moon. Yeah, separation and decoration. Exactly. So you get the moon and the stars, and this is day 4. So we're gonna do some moons and stars today.
All right.
Relatively, and just to give a little review, we have been finding that a phrase or a word that to kind of almost like chapter titles. Helpful to kind of organize ourselves, even though the originals don't have that. And so to just perhaps give a little bit of review, we're going to jump into chapters, letters 16 through 19 for today, but to just review the first 15. So why don't you take us through each one of those, and we can kind of note where which day of the week has which part was it in which, and just give those more. So day 1 on Sunday we did the first 6, and what were our words for each one of those chapters?
Well, the first letter of the first day.
Yep.
We were talking about distraction.
Yep. So there's distraction, and then second chapter was disappointment.
And then disappointment.
Yep.
And then we were talking about weaponizing family. So that was the one about him and his mother. And then emotionalizing prayer.
That's right, where you pray and you just get caught up in the emotion of it and don't distinguish it from the actual either action that we're called to or the quiet that's there.
Yeah, and then the two-edged sword of suffering.
Yeah, this is where Screwtape says, don't think that suffering or the world war is necessarily a good thing for our side, because the enemy, God, can use a suffering to bring about actually redemption. So it cuts both ways, so to speak. So it's a caution there. And
then we finished off Sunday with fear.
That's right. So the first day of the first chapter, first day, fear and how that can paralyze, and then jumped into that second day, or the second part, chapter 7, extremisms, especially political or factionalism. We'll get into how that works even in the church in this way. And then 8 and 9 were kind of a pair, weren't they?
Yeah. 8 was emotional ups and downs, and 9 was about your own selfish pleasures.
Yeah, how the devil uses our low moments, or those troughs in our life, the dry spell, to try to fill them with pleasure and stimuli, and just to kind of almost like a form of distraction on the sensate level, for sure. Yeah. And then to weaponizing. I've noticed this as we go through. I like the word weaponize for some reason, but because it gives that sense of how we can use something that's a gift or a talent or some aspect of what God has given us, and we can kind of turn it into a kind of a weapon or a tool to be used against someone. And that's what Screwtape is often doing, to use these things that even the patient has as natural gifts from God to try to turn them against their purpose. And so,
indeed. I mean, for us, these are tools for our own edification, but they could be used as weapons by the other side. Right?
That's right. And so those the two that chapters or letters 10 and 11 were.
Number 10 was weaponizing friendship.
Yep. So using
friendship. Yeah, and number 11 was weaponizing humor. That's right. Interesting.
Yeah, and we're talking about that being glib or not being insincere.
Yeah. Or being flippant.
Or flippant. That was the word I was looking for. Yeah, flippant in that way, he says. And then 12, then the next section, 12 through 15, the different chapters. This chapter 12, in some ways, this might be the summary of the whole, in the sense of the strategy of Satan. If you want to know what Satan's strategy is long term, it is the
gentle slope to perdition.
The gentle slope, right? All the way that hell is a road which is paved with just little ways in which we say yes to ourselves and no to others, or indifferent to others.
Just as Saint Therese has her little way, so does Satan. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's good. Exactly. Yeah. It is the little way and the little way down, the little moments of selfishness. There's a warning, which should be encouraging to us, that of the power of simple pleasures, which is the next chapter, where kind of the plot pivots, where the patient begins to just be rooted and grounded in the reality of simple pleasures that the devil wants us to avoid. And then there's two more weaponizations in terms of good things we're given, but God, or the enemy, God in this case, exactly gives to us, but that the devil, or in this case, our Father below, as Screwtape calls him, tries to weaponize, and those are.
And 14 is weaponizing humility, and 15 is weaponizing time.
That's right. Those were two powerful and very subtle, powerful in that they were subtle ways in which you think if someone has a humble disposition, or is naturally going to be listening, empathetic, has a sense of their own place, and not seeing how the world revolves around them by any means, you think, wow, how can that be a bad thing? And that's where the devil says, oh yeah, get them to think how great they are at humility, right? And so even in the moment of being humble, to tempt them to pride, tempt us to pride in that way. Ooh, that's that is diabolical.
Yeah.
or again, time. How often we either live in the past or just are fretting about the future. And very contemporary in his analysis of how the devil can get our present circumstances, and he basically used pandemic panic to be able to take us out of the moment, because once again, heaven is the eternal now, and therefore it is best represented and experienced in the present. So the devil's going to try to get us distracted from, or somehow
to either live in the past or worry about the future,
disconnected from from ourselves. So far for that summary, a little 5-minute summary of where we've been. And for today, then, we're going to do chapters 16 through 19. So take us through. Why don't you start out with chapter 16? What's our word or phrase for 16?
For 16, it's to weaponize the church.
Weaponizing church. Okay, what does this boil down to? It was interesting. I thought that you think, oh gosh, the person's going to church, the devil must be really upset. But Screwtape is actually like, oh, Wormwood, you mentioned he's going to church. Yeah, we can use that.
Yeah,
we can use going to church. There's lots of temptations possible when you go to church.
And what's interesting is that Screwtape is always disappointed about Wormwood's something. There's always something he's doing wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And what Wormwood is doing wrong this time is making sure that the patient actually stays in the same church.
Yeah. No, that's right. It's interesting that, as you put that, just as a general strategy, if you did a little meta-analysis of the relationship between Screwtape and his quote-unquote nephew, Wormwood, even the advice is given is selfish advice, because he's always trying to make himself look better. And in different letters, as we'll go on, he gets very paranoid about are you talking to anyone else about what we're talking about?
Exactly.
Because very paranoid and kind of, and he tries to make himself look better. And so even in the very advice that he's giving, you see the way in which evil turns in and on itself and all of the effects
self-serving.
of it. Yeah, and it erodes any sense of. So Screwtape and Wormwood can't really have a healthy mentor relationship because there's an amount of selfishness that's always going to be there. And so rather than, you imagine just supposed imaginings and hypothetical imaginings.
Right.
If a guardian angel were getting advice from like St. Michael or something, you'd expect that advice to be...
Of course it's St. Michael.
Well, come on. You'd expect the advice to be encouraging and uplifting and supporting. And here, in some ways, if Screwtape is wanting Wormwood to be successful and tempting, he should be more like encouraging, and instead he's always like making him feel less than and kind of eroding his confidence. In other words, if Screwtape's goal is to have the most effective tempter, he's not doing a good job because his own selfishness is getting in the way of training him to be that.
Right.
In other words, evil always falls in on itself. Not even evil.
Yeah.
Evil could be worse if it were better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know if that made sense, but
Yeah.
the point is, he's not a good mentor. He
Right.
doesn't encourage. He would actually probably be, if he could incentivize. He doesn't know how to incentivize rightly because he's too selfish to see beyond his own building himself up. Anyway, I say that all because, as you mentioned, he always starts his letters by saying, "You mentioned this. Oh, you're doing it." Basically,
This is what you're doing wrong.
He's overly critical. He criticizes and nitpicks his own mentee or his own nephew in a way that probably isn't helpful. But he says, if your patient is not going to be dissuaded from going to church, you know what the best thing you can do? He says the next best thing is to send him over all over the neighborhood looking for a church that quote unquote suits him until he becomes a taster or connoisseur of churches.
It's absolutely amazing.
It is, because
we see this in our own lives too.
Yeah, what's the term that's used for that?
Church hopping.
Yeah, church hopping, or I've heard of you heard cafeteria Catholic.
Ah,
right.
Sure.
So this is where it's interesting that you think, oh, that's kind of a modern or at least a contemporary kind of phrase. Well, it comes right from Lewis. We talk a connoisseur of churches, where you just come and you just you kind of take a little bit from here and a little bit from that. I like the preaching at that church. I like the music at that church. I like the kind of different groups at that church, and you just kind of like church hop and just find, and ultimately what you're doing is just finding a place where you how to put it, where your own thoughts and beliefs are just reflected right back at you.
Right.
And so you never grow.
You never grow. You never
for growth.
allow yourself to be part of a virtuous community.
That's right.
You just allow yourself to be superficially members of all these communities, so therefore you belong substantially to none.
Yeah, and then this is where Lewis likens, and I think here that analogy when we talk about St. Dominic's being a spiritual home or family. Guess what? You certainly within family members, there's choices made, but you don't get to choose your family in some ways, right? And I do know that, I mean, maybe in a past era, it was kind of like your church was what you were geographically kind of like there. That's you were in the boundary lines, that's where you are.
That's where you are,
Let's face it, St. Dominic's is a destination church. People come from all over, right? And so there's a fair amount of church hopping that goes in daily liturgy, but there really is, and C.S. Lewis is pointing out there, a goodness and a way in which we need to really be connected with a parish, with a family. Now, in modern times, that might mean that it means you're closer to a daily mass here or there, so there's practicalities involved. But really, we shouldn't just be going to whatever church we find kind of suits our needs or really is kind of like we like. It's interesting. C.S. Lewis, this goes beyond even his letter. I was looking at his own experience because I thought, I wonder what church C.S. Lewis went to. It turns out that the church he went to was not his. If he had a preferred church, it wasn't his local church.
Okay.
He didn't like this. One I found out he didn't care for the organ.
The organ.
He didn't like the organ. He didn't like big music like that. He just liked simple music. Which I thought was interesting.
That is interesting.
It's like,
he wanted
organ.
A simpler liturgy. Okay.
Exactly. In terms of, I mean, simple liturgy, didn't want all the kind of big organ swell and all the rest. Interesting. And then the other thing that he discovered is he wasn't particularly fond of the preacher that was in the local parish where he was at the time. So, but he went to he saw his responsibility and that sense of being connected to the Church of England at that time, being committed not just to a particular preacher or a particular musician or organ or a particular style of liturgy. And here it might be a little different. Let's be clear. So this is not Catholic, so perhaps it doesn't have the fullness of what we would appreciate in terms of the sacramental life of the church. But his point is still well taken that we can be too particular about what church we go to, and therefore stunt the growth that God wants to get. God always teaches us through family, and even our spiritual families can grow. So it's interesting that he gives the two examples he gives, which he says in the preface, he's not thinking of any particular clergyman.
But he ends up naming people.
Well, he gives Father Spike. He says Father Spike.
Father Spike is.
Exactly. But he gives the one example of the clergyman, the vicar, who has basically lost his faith, and so his preaching is very routine and mundane, and who scandalizes his parishioners because it ends up, even though he starts out, like with powerful kind of sermons that engender faith, he himself loses faith in the routine of it all. He conducts his service is just in a way that just, he says, is that an endless round of little treadmills of his own personal kind of favorite songs and favorite lessons, and basically he's kind of lost his faith, shocks him with his unbelief. So that's the one side. And then on the other side, the other extreme, we talked about extremism before, Father Spike, who it sounds like he's always into the newest fad. What's the newest movement? And so he says one day he's almost a communist, the next he's not far from some kind of theocratic fascism, one day a scholastic, the next going to deny human reason altogether. One day it's all about politics, and the next day all of the worlds are under judgment. So he's kind of it's back in whatever the newest fad is, right? So we can this is true in our own time. You get some kind of movement that comes up, and you're all about, and then the church, and then it's this. It's just this kind of endless churn of whatever's politically correct or spiritually quote unquote correct at the time. But he says, on the other hand, that Father Spike is believes, right, and he's engaged. And he does what he loves his parishioners, and so it's kind of like he points out these extremes in no way to point out particular individuals, but as types of what can rub people the wrong way. Either the person kind of going through the motions, the person who's always like, at the whim of whatever culture seems to deem to be important at the time. And so he says it doesn't really matter who the clergyman is. There's a way in which the devil is always going to look to divide the community by personal preference. Right, and so we say, "Oh, I'm with this church, I'm with that church," and he points out that from the days of Paul and Apollos, right? So this is where St. Paul says in his letters, one person says, "Oh, I'm for Apollos, the great preacher," or "I'm for Paul," and they basically distinguish themselves out by who they like to preach. So I'm for Father Isaiah, his preacher. I'm for Father Christopher. I'm for Father, as if we were different churches, and that's why I love the fact that here at St. Dominic's, I'm the pastor, but but it's really the Dominican community
that
ministers, and so I really think we have there's a real spiritual good that comes where it's not just the particular vision of it, hopefully of any one person, but communal spirituality that comes from our shared life together. We all have our responsibilities in that, but it hopefully leads to a less of a factionalization within the community that we see ourselves. We might not all agree about certain things. We might not have the same tastes liturgically or musically, same style of preaching, but we're all one family in Christ, and here at St. Dominic's, hopefully one community connected in that way. Yeah,
and honestly, I think one of the strange blessings of this time of pandemic was the fact that we only have one conventual mass. So it's offered to the entire community every day. Another member of the community offering their preaching, their liturgical style, their preferences, so that all of us as a community can build up the body of Christ.
It's been amazing to hear from folks that saying that they say how we love how we see everyone, as you say, can celebrating, or even when in a particular moment when liturgically there's the moment at the very end of the Eucharistic prayer when we do the per ipsum in Latin, so the through him, with him, and in him, and kind of elevate the patent and the chalice. And as priests, if there are concelebrating priests, you'd all do that in unison. And so to have everyone doing that in unison, all surrounding the altar,
singing it all and all that.
Just kind of like it's really kind of a really for me it's if I'm just celebrating Mass with myself, it's obviously a moment when you're drawn up into the life of God, Father, Son, and Spirit. But when you're in union with 5 or 6 other guys and we're all doing it, it's powerful.
It's powerful.
It does. I think there's a real virtue to that. And so the point here in this chapter, though, is the devil can use even the church experience, and or lack of experience. And it goes back to those themes of it's a particular, I think, example of the kind of the disappointment of the he hints at this,
human limitations.
Exactly. Let's face it, the clergy people, we preach it. We're human, right? We're human. We're gonna rub people the wrong way. People naturally have preferences, and so the devil says, okay, take those preferences and make even your relationship with God about those preferences rather than the relationship with a family, for better or for worse. You're with that parish. So I really do like I think this might go to a different era of Catholic, that just you support your local parish in every way. There's the kind of the 5 precepts of the church, and one of them is to basically tithe, to give that 10%, or that what God is calling you to give to the church. Is just very much ingrained in a certain mentality of Catholic practice that perhaps is not quite there. It's perhaps a little bit lost or eroded. Just kind of like, oh no, I go to church wherever it's available, available or easy or suits me, and things like that. But there's a real value to that, because there's a danger in being separated, or just kind of a doing church by choice. Right. Church by choice. That leads to so that's that chapter 16. Then chapter 17 on, we begin to get into the 7 deadly sins a little bit. He begins to kind of take a look at the especially gluttony and sexuality, so the sins of the flesh, if you will. So chapter 17 in that particular way is basically gluttony.
And a very interesting take of gluttony, especially in the first half of the letter, where talking about even being picky is a form of gluttony.
What did you think about that? I thought that was the point, is that every vice can be, there's one way to go right, that is the mean. So if you want the virtue, so that would be, in this case, your relationship with food being healthy, right? And the healthy way to food is to see it as both, it gives our body energy, and then there's foods that both kind of like nourish, and there's foods which kind of delight. And having a good balance between the two is and that's going to be different for everyone, but just seeking the mean, seeking the balance. But when it comes to any kind of vice, being extreme on either side, is that, and he says, normally when we think of gluttony, we think of excess, right? And I think for most people, just you think gluttony is too much food, and you get the Thanksgiving Day, where it's just like, copious amounts, or Super Bowl, parties, or this, that, and the other thing, where you
a special event like a wedding or something.
Fourth of July.
4th of July, and of course,
hot dog and hamburger.
Why choose?
It's the 4th of July. Exactly. The only choice is mustard or ketchup. No,
here we go again.
Exactly. I love it. Drawing him back. Just when he thought he was out, drawing him back into that discussion. Anyway, no.
The perfect condiment.
But Jesus takes it, as you say, a different route. He says, gluttony through Screwtape. Screwtape says, gluttony by excess is, dime a dozen. It's certainly easily tempted, but he says the returns on that are diminishing in a sense, because at some point a person's health is going to fail them if they're always excessive in gluttony, and cause their early demise kind of thing. It gives them a chance to kind of right their ways. But there's actually a more subtle form of gluttony on the other extreme